that we have quite a few scenic resources that are in the ag zone. And who knows what will happen after the OSI, but I just am wondering about merging those two. And I don't have enough experience with either zoning or OSIs to know how other communities might have done that.
Does that make you?
Might be helpful. It might be helpful to hear from John or CJ about that. Yeah, that could be a good cue line.
I'll defer to CJ. Then CJ, go ahead. You go first.
Yeah, so this is just the base zoning. This is not meant to be an overlay, as in the Cuba Lake Scenic Byway District that you've all been talking about. So the short answer is no.
What if we're talking about the scenic resources inventory, CJ?
The scenic resources inventory is not going to be referenced in the basic agricultural zoning district plan, like a comprehensive plan, like small c, small.
Sorry, you broke up a little, and then I was getting a message from Andrew Benson. Could you repeat that, CJ?
Yeah, there's the scenic resources inventory is an independent document, so it's more like the comprehensive plan. So that would not be included in the zoning. No.
So, forgive my ignorance, but how will we use the scenic resources inventory?
So the comprehensive plan, lower stake KC, C and P, that's right. It's the 2018 comprehensive plan. It's the 2015 ag plan. It's the Parks, Recreation and Trails master plan. It's any of the town's documents that make up the compendium of planning references, and it's used in planning review essentially as needed during a particular development review project or acquisition or something of the like. Perhaps there's additional guidance that John could provide on this, but that's essentially the basics of the idea.
Yeah, there's a couple things. There's a couple ways you could consider referencing, incorporating it. I have more, now forgive me because I always hesitate to give zoning advice without looking at your entire code so I know how things fit together. It's really hard to look at one thing and it might create a snafu somewhere else in your code. So I haven't done a thorough look, but I've just kind of chewed on the concept for an hour or so looking through some documents. I think there's potential in, for example, I have not looked at your site plan review section of your base code, of your regular code, but you could refer to these potential documents in site plan review criteria. So they're not necessarily in the ag zoning district per se, but you could use them as reference documents for site plan review. There's a couple things you need to be careful of though. One, and forgive me for not knowing the adoption procedure, I'd highly recommend that the SRI or the NRI be adopted, number one. I mean, formally through seeker and the whole 9 yards if you're going to incorporate it into a code. And then the other thing we typically will do is reference a comprehensive plan in the code, but we tend to be specific about a comprehensive plan reference. So for example, in our intent and purpose statements, when we draft code language, it'll talk about to, preserve or foster or implement the vision and goals of the comprehensive plan. So I think it's, if you do weave the code and the plan together, which I think is a good practice, you've got to be very specific, because I just looked through the NRI, for example, just to refresh my memory before the meeting. And there's a lot of great information in there. And maybe I glossed right over it because it was more of a cursory review for this conversation right here that we're having. There's a lot of good best practices in there. There's a lot of good things that say why wetlands are important and why this is important and why that is important. So it's a fantastic document, but I didn't get any specific recommendations or goals or actions in it. So if you're referencing it as part of your zoning code, it would be to further the recommendations or to further the objectives, the action items, whatever the case may be, through a zoning implementation. To me, the natural resource inventory is just that, it's an inventory. So I didn't get reading that. I didn't get and again, I haven't looked at all, you guys have a lot of good work and we're still plowing through some of the documents. So how that relates to the comp plan, how that relates to, the town board saying, here's our inventory. And oh, by the way, we passed this policy saying the inventory is important and we want to maintain and implement it and preserve all these things. So I would want to make sure that there's a nexus between what these documents are and what you're trying to accomplish through the zoning code. So I'll give you an example. It's a completely different context. The city of Rochester back in, it's a long time ago now, 80s, I think. They had a pretty talented architect go through and essentially designate, they called it a designated building of value. So DBV, designated building of value. And that sat on the shelf for a decade, maybe 2 decades. The city updated its zoning code in 2005, and they dusted off that document and said, oh, if you are one of these designated buildings of value, then you have different site plan review triggers and different review criteria. So they kind of married the two together in a pretty creative way through the zoning code and in terms of review triggers and criteria. So there are some ways to do it depending on how your site plan is set up, but to just incorporate it in. The first thing I would do as someone who writes a lot of code is, what does that mean to me as a landowner? What does it create another review? Does it create a different criteria for you, the decision makers? You just have to, I think, add a purpose and a role. I guess a role is a better term. You need to have a role for those documents in the code. What's the role? And I'm not saying there isn't one. I'm just saying that's something you want to talk about rather than just saying they should be in the code and then we've succeeded. Just putting them in the code and not giving them a role or a trigger, I don't know if that's valuable. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thanks, John. That's helpful.
Just checking. Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Thanks.
So where do you want to go with this, Carrie?
Well, I just wonder, are we too far down the path to follow some of John's guidance on this? I realize we're trying to fast track this ag zoning, but that does make me a bit nervous. And it again, I'm very much a novice. I think our CAC is still just wrapping our hands around this. It seems like there's the possibility that we're missing an opportunity here. But CJ, you're very familiar with SRIs and you're very familiar with code. And it doesn't seem like you're giving us guidance to weave the two together.
So as John just mentioned about baking in elements of inventories into site plan, the site plan standards are to follow. Those are, the town board authorized 3 different actions as part of this zoning update. The first was agriculture zoning district as dictated by the 2015 ag plan. updates to site plan review standards. So that's the place at which this could be brought into, again, the discretionary review process, either by, mechanism like site plan review. And the third is the major subdivision standards. So to update those to reflect the need to have conservation subdivision standards. So again, the ag zoning is meant to be a very basic, standalone, uniform zoning district to, in essence, replace much of the RA zoning district. So by design, we're essentially trying to keep that fairly simple and straightforward.
Okay, so if I'm getting this, and sorry for being a little bit thick here, there are still two other potential avenues that might be even more appropriate than the basic standalone ag zoning, which we're working on now.
You
Go
got
ahead.
it. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm still not clear what in our comments overall, the first one is reference the town's adopted scenic resources inventory in this zoning as triggering the need for a special review public meeting in areas designated scenic. So that's what you're asking about. And I guess the question is, how is that done? And would that be incorporated in the ag zone as something that needs special consideration?
Well, if I'm understanding CJ correctly, ag zoning is meant to be a little bit more basic, perhaps not as specific, and that there are two other avenues that are going to kick in for potential development in the ag zone that could refer to specifics in the SRI, if I have
Right.
that. Okay.
Right. So when you're looking at the ag zoning district, you can see that there's uses subject to, for instance, streamlined site plan review and then regular site plan review as well. Were one of those uses proposed in the ag zone, we would look at the range of documents that we have that are referenced in the site plan review standards, for instance. So say somebody is looking to, build a, let's say something like a farm brewery, right? And it was located in an area that had been identified in the scenic resources inventory. The lead agency, as part of that review process, probably through environmental review, but also through site planning as well, is going to consider that as part of the review and likely reach out to CAC for comments on the disposition of the building and other site improvements and how those could enhance or at least not have a deleterious impact on the scenic views, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically you're saying that the scenic resources inventory can be incorporated in a site plan review.
Yes, absolutely. That's correct.
Okay.
And I'll just add my 2 cents to give you guys credit and CJ kudos, because the subdivision piece is so often overlooked. She mentioned that third leg of the stool. That's a great idea. And I think what you're getting from what CJ is saying, she's spot on. This is the way my initial reaction to this district. It's a base district. And I think as a zoning geek, we use the term base is because it's your starting point. And then there's all these other ways to layer reviews and information and triggers elsewhere in the document. So I think CJ is right on point.
Okay. So Carrie, are you happy with that? Good. Yeah.
But do we want that to be part of the document? That we're gonna, that site for site specific planning, the natural resource inventory and stuff should be considered? Do we want that to be part of this document explicitly? Or are we just going to trust that that will happen?
I think that's for CJ to answer.
So I think the question was, the scenic resources inventory, at what point would they be considered? And just to go back to John's earlier comment, yes, the scenic resources inventory and natural resources inventory were adopted by the town board. So they're intended to be used in consideration of site plan review and other types of discretionary actions like that. So again, the ag zoning district is meant to be, a way to take a look at the district as a whole, uniform base zoning that you can essentially just see in a couple page glance of what's allowed and how it's allowed.
Thanks. That's very helpful to get
Yeah.
that straight. I really appreciate the time.
So the comment seemed to be that this document, being a total novice to any of this, when I read through it, what I saw was that it totally lacked specificity. And given the battle that's going on with the Danby market, where that zoning rule has the lack of specificity that permits the Danby market to come in and do what it's doing, the question is, does this basic zoning document need to have a little more meat on its bones to avoid this kind of issue in the future? So that definitions of some of the words in here are just left open to anybody's imagination. And I'm not sure, 5 years from now, somebody's imagination might come up with something that people don't really want. So how do you plan for things like that? Or you can't obviously make a laundry list of here's the things you can do, but maybe there's some place in here's of things you won't do so that you don't get into, a mess in the future. It's because like I say, the Danby market thing just keeps cropping up as, gee, maybe if the wording of that zoning had been a bit better, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in.
Yeah, I struggle with that same thing. I mean, you can attempt to be very specific, but you're never going to cover every possibility on either side of what's allowed or what is not allowed. So when I read down through this thing, I'm looking at some things and like, okay, where, whose mind did that one pop out of? And, what are we not going to be able to anticipate going down the road? And so when you do come up against something like that, is that when a site plan review comes in because the general base document doesn't cover that, or how, what is the procedure for something like that?
Yeah, I totally agree with both you guys. I feel like in some cases there's specificity that it's just arbitrary. 35% of a space of a building can only be used for personal space or homing. Like, where did 35% come up with it? And who's going to go out and measure that? Make sure it's 35% and no more. And 144 square feet came with some point. I'm like, these numbers are these are made up numbers. It would be nice if this document read like, here's the intent. Like there's an idea behind it, not a number, because the numbers just seem totally like everybody sat around a thing and like we did with our setbacks for the solar panels and just made stuff up. And so that's frustrating because I don't even know what their intent is with those numbers sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Todd. I mean, it seems like because these the specifics seem to be revising what was there before instead of like actually looking at the the purpose to begin with. I think that that's one of the advantages of having outsiders from, like us, look at it and saying, wait a minute, yeah, maybe it's updated, but to what end? So yeah, I would say great point.
Karen said that much better than I did.
So do we want to go through a couple of the comments and questions that were on the beefy side, just to see if we can get some agreement? Because I know, Ed, you had brought up the thing about water. John Fleming, you had brought up some issues around well placement, and something that you'd already commented to John Zepko about. And those are things that I think we should be dealing with tonight so we can get some agreement among the CAC members.
I agree, Carrie. Do you have a short list of what you think are the meaty ones?
So I had sent out the summary, and under overall at the very beginning, the second one, B, is John Fleming's comment about encouraging new wells to be placed 100 feet from lines adjacent to active ag fields. And then, as we're asking for in this document, the reasoning to permit continued ability to apply organic nutrients to the entire field.
And the 100 feet is because by law, you have to stay 100 feet from a well with any manure applications. So it's, it's not great when a house puts their well right on basically as close to the line as they can. And then the farmer has to, where they didn't before, have to start to work around that. And, it makes the field less efficient to work, and it never produces as well if you've got to come back with commercial fertilizer or something. So what, and I have no idea where this could or should be suggested, or, how you go about encouraging that. I don't know what the mechanisms are for that.
But the water issue could be a big one if you hit it, because in the introduction to all this, basically it's saying there will be no, if foreseeable future, no water lines going into these ag districts. That's basically what it says. But on the flip side of it, so that means all the people in the ag district are going to have to draw their water from a well. And as far as I'm aware of, the town has no map of what the aquifer looks like. And nor is there any water protection system in place that I'm aware of. There could be, so that somebody could put up some kind of a facility, pull 50,000 gallons of water out of the aquifer daily, and have 10 houses around it go dry in August. And so there's on one hand, no water going to be supplied externally, but on the other hand, and John's point of where this well could go and compromise his operation based on where the wells are put, but where is the water program for the town? It doesn't seem to exist.
Yeah, I don't think we have one, Ed. We have a tiny aquifer down in the Salmon Creek floodplains, but there really is no real, we all are getting our water from shale, fractured shale. Okay. And that's really not, there's not a ton of water there. There's enough for, homes scattered throughout the landscape, but it's not a huge amount of water. But I think you're absolutely right. And I don't think that's something we need to discuss tonight as far as agricultural use of water. I think at some point we need to think about accessing the lake if we're going to bring like irrigation water up into the landscape or something, because there just isn't enough in the shale to do that. But I appreciate, John, your 100-foot thing, because like there's a rationale there. That's based on DEC regulate rules, right? So whether it's good or bad, at least there's a rationale behind it. I appreciate that.
Can I ask a question also? And I'm thinking that this is probably more of a land use question than something that should go into the ag zoning, but especially with the flooding and riparian buffer loss, is there any place in the ag plan that we could be stipulating better water quality protections, or is that am I getting out of my lane on on that?
So that's a stormwater management question, and most agricultural uses are exempt from stormwater regulations broadly, but the town does have a stormwater and erosion control local law, which is enforced by the town's stormwater management officer. And generally speaking, in concert with things like site plan review, it's typically triggered by larger projects, generally is based on disturbance of the land.
Okay, I think we're falling really short on that as I'm watching stream banks disappear. But I think that that's probably a political question and not one about the ag plan. So I'll shut up.
So could we go back to John Fleming's suggestion about the 100-foot from the boundary line? Personally, I don't have a problem with that. And
I like that idea because we have established areas that are being cropped. And so if someone's going to sink a well, it shouldn't be incumbent on the farmer to accommodate them if they want to encroach on the ag land. Maybe the new well should actually have to accommodate the farmer, which is kind of a backwards way of thinking about this. But I like the way John's thinking, like keep it 100 feet away from the ag land because that's what DEC said it should be.
And if they care about their water quality, obviously that's going to put them at less risk.
Yeah, generally speaking, we defer to Tompkins County Health Department. So they, generally speaking, are the ones who approve this siting, at least of on-site wastewater, but they're also considering a well separation as part of that, based on Department of Health standards. So, yeah, we generally speaking don't bring that into zoning, but it is something considered at the time of building permitting.
Okay. So in terms of this document, we don't really have to, there's not a lot we can do there. Other than move on to the next issue here.
Well, that's
Is that what we're saying? That it doesn't, I mean, we could forward it along, but that it would probably get nixed because the health department, that's going to be in their purview.
That's what it sounds like to me. Yeah. But, we certainly should leave that in there with our comments just to make people aware of it.
Yeah, so the comments that you sent along, we'll make sure that those are shared with the Code Revision Committee and the town board. So that package of comments is going to go to them verbatim, without any edits made so that they can see the full range of comments that you're providing. So.
Okay, so let's leave it in then, and then
Yeah,
they can then decide, okay, this is going to be handled by Tompkins County. Okay, so Ed, getting back to your comment about water, I think it was you who had an issue about in your email. I think you took issue with how unfriendly it seemed to people.
Well, it just, when I was reading down through it, I mean, there's ways of, the preamble of the document is saying this is a rural area, there's going to be noise and dust, I think the wording could have been a little less like, we're never providing water and sewer, so go away. It could have been just part of, this is the rural area, and this is, as for the foreseeable future, these services are not part of the program, but to be a little more, I don't know. I mean, later on in the document, I mean, there's provisions for water towers. So obviously, there's some thought for water. Why build water tanks and towers if there's going to be a more wholesale ban on bringing in water from elsewhere? So it's sort of a little inconsistency there.
Right, because they've already been talking about the expansion up Conlin Road and Buck Road and all that, assuming that's still on. I haven't heard whether it is or not, but that would be in that current ag zone, and there is, you know, so obviously they are looking at still expanding that up into some of the ag zones. So I guess that those two contradict themselves.
Yeah, it was just to try to soften it a little bit, as opposed to, I can see what the sentiment was, but just to say, currently there's a limited amount of anticipated expansion of the water is probably the easier one than the sewer lines, but as a heads up, this is the way it is, and for the foreseeable future. But that was as far as I want to go with that. But as I say, its consistency there was when further down you're building water towers. So somehow, if you don't have water service, why build water towers?
I mean, my read on that issue is that municipal water service is not being encouraged because we don't want suburbs in the ag area. I mean, am I reading that correctly?
Yeah.
Assuming that's the case, but
Yeah.
But I think that goes back to the earlier point. It would be nice if they said why they're having this thing as opposed to just mandating numbers, I think. And I think that's what Ed was wanting too. Like, okay, you're not going to do this. Is it because we want to preserve this rural ag flavor, and putting these types of this type of infrastructure would promote something different than that? I think that would be useful for people reading this, so they don't just get their panties in a twist.
And there should be some flexibility. What happens if a group of houses somewhere near where the water lines are right now, suddenly all their wells are poisoned, like it happened in Jacksonville? If you've got hard language that this isn't going to happen, what resolution is it going to be to people who have poisoned wells or suddenly have no water? I would think there should be the consideration they're going to run some water lines in to help these people out.
Well, you can have a variance for that. You go to the zoning board of appeals and state your case. So
fine.
Any of these zoning rules can be brought to the zoning board of appeals if you have a legitimate case. So yeah, these rules can be broken.
These are all great. I've got to discuss them. I'm afraid Karen's going to leave pretty soon. So can we move on to number C, which I think was Carrie's thing? C kind of is like that third lick in the lollipop. There's a lot. It's not just C. There's like a whole bunch of stuff embedded in that. So I wonder if we should move on to that.
Are you talking about the civic uses, Todd?
No, I'm talking about the comments. You had an A, B, and C, which sort of seem to be like, these are the three big ones we should discuss tonight. And we just did water and wells.
Yeah, and actually, as far as the overall comments, that little lowercase c is just a small comment, but I think there are some bigger issues further down in the document that do substantiate some of what we're saying tonight. Karen, since you might need to leave at 7:30, why don't we start with you to see if there was something that you felt deserved discussion?
I actually did not have a chance to go through the whole thing, so I mostly am listening.
Okay. People had a number of comments about rural enterprise, 10 persons, can't employ more than 10 persons. And then there were some other things further down in the document. I think we're curious to know why the limit on the number of persons. Why wouldn't that be expressed in terms of FTEs instead of number of people? That's under page 2L, rural enterprise.
Yeah, so that was a committee idea to, put a limit on the operations. I mean, really, it's not a great way to do land use, is to have somebody trying to go out there and count the number of employees. It's likely going to be amended to have some kind of limitation on building square footage. That's likely the change to happen there.
Okay.
Do we want to put in a statement in this draft about it would be good to have to show more of a rationale for some of these decisions?
Yeah.
Because underneath that, I had as an example, Stonewell, if anyone's familiar with it, it's a machine shop up in the corner of Sill Road and 34. It's actually in the town of Genoa, but I'm sure they employ more than 10 people up there, but that's not the kind of business that I would see as a negative at all, and why you would want to limit a business from being successful if it had 15 people versus 10. It's just kind of random to me.
It also seems like it's going to be challenging to limit a business based on square footage, because I picture barns quite large.
Right.
I can't quite figure out. Is the intent that the town doesn't want it to border on being industrial?
I think that's probably the intent, but I wouldn't know where it all originated for sure. But yeah, I think they want ag to be primary and everything else to be secondary is my
Yeah.
take on it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And anything that would be more industrial, they would prefer to be further south in the town, out of the ag district, preferably.
So does that 10 not apply if it's an agricultural business?
Like a farm, it definitely doesn't apply to that.
Right. But I mean, you could have some, agricultural business that fixes tires and supplies fuel or whatever. I mean, I don't know if that's classified under rural enterprise or some other classification that's more agricultural, in which case it would be less limiting.
You have an agriculture related commerce, which doesn't seem to have any limits, and it could be ag equipment and parts and batteries, and
Yeah.
it seems pretty broad in its context without limits. So
Right.
I'm not sure why that's limitless as opposed, and then the other one has limits on it.
Right. And that's been my frustration. As you go down through here, you see one thing that does have limits and something else that's pretty similar and it has zero limits, whether it's on square footage or number of people or rooms that are available to be boarded or whatever. Yeah.
So I just wonder if we have a comprehensive enough introduction, to the whole thing. There is this introduction about farming life, prioritizes and preserves viable agriculture in the town. So, I mean, it is there.
Is that on that other 2-page document?
Yeah, that's on that 4-pager.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't quite understand the difference between the two PDFs. Are they going to be blended into one?
Yeah, they're different sections of the town code. One of them are the uses and the definitions and limitations of said uses. And the other document is meant to be essentially kind of a almost like a standalone tear out, so that if you wanted to at a glance see what standards apply, what the intent is of the agriculture district. You want to see what uses you can do, what a typical kind of residential activation looks like, and then what the parameters for development are within that particular zoning district. You can essentially see it at a glance. So
Okay.
yes, these are different sections of the town zoning code. So chapter 270 is the town zoning code. So if you go to E code or type in town of Lansing E code, you can see chapter 270 its entirety. And it's broken down into approximately about 12 different articles. And each of those articles play a role in complementing each other and cross-reference each other. And so that's why those two standalone documents there are essentially to say, here's what the uses are, and then define those further, and then any specific standards that might apply town-wide, and then also within that particular zoning district. So I think I heard somebody mention the number 144 square feet. So for us, that number is important because anything over 144 square feet requires a building permit. So for us, that's a really good heuristic for kind of really a building cutoff, especially when we want to encourage farmers to put out roadside stands and sell products, to those that might just be happening by. So that's kind of an example of that. I don't know if this explains that very well, but.
That's helpful.
I don't know if this is helpful or appropriate since I'm here for more for the OSI, but I can give you just some observations on some of the things I looked at. And again, it was real brief, but talking about some of the size limits that I see, I think I see, and CJ, feel free to chime in, I see a method to the madness, which is not always the case in zoning writing. So I think this is pretty well done. I see that the size limits is, based on my first review, is for essentially non-farm operations. You're talking a feed store, central tractor, landscaping business, essentially retail businesses are what the size limits, where the size limits kick in. So I would see them as a different animal, no pun intended, than an agricultural operation. I mean, you've got John's operation, and then you have a feed store. So do you need size limits? That's a policy decision for Lansing to figure out. But I understand the thought process behind it to say, a 14,000 square foot building is about a chain drugstore. If you think like a CVS or a Rite Aid or something like that, they are generally around 15,000 square feet, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. So that's the scale, versus, some of the landscaping businesses and things like that can get quite large. Is that a problem in the ag district? Again, that's a local decision for you all to talk about and figure out what makes the most sense for Lansing. But I see the method to the madness that the retail operations that may or may not be supportive of farming have a size limit. So it doesn't, my experience with retail operations of any type, they generally tend to attract other retail operations. So if you get one, you might get two, you might get three. So limiting the size of them, there, like I said, there is some wisdom there. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I just get the thinking as someone who just looked at the code cold, 2 hours ago. I kind of get that thought process. Doesn't mean you should or have to do it, but like I said, there seems to be a method to the madness.
We appreciate your comments, John.
Yeah, no, it's well written. I'm not saying when I say it's relevant, doesn't mean it's perfect for Lansing. That's not my purview here. I haven't been involved in the drafting, but as I read through it, I liked everything I saw. I think it's what really well thought out.
It's good to hear.
The one comment I did like is the bed and breakfasts that can have 10 rooms, but no more than 10 people. You're like, I had a family of 9 that I grew up in. We would completely swamp that one place if we just signed to go there.
Yeah, the planning board had a problem with that one too. doesn't make a lot of sense.
So the thought is to change something there to make the math work. If it's going to be
Yeah.
10 rooms, it's 20 people or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the code revision committee will also remove the reference to people on that one too. So thanks for that.
Right.
So are there any other major comments that we want to discuss on this?
I think the very last one on this summary document that Tom, you assembled and I tweaked, item for consideration about an individual who purchased a property. I think that's worth at least gaining some understanding on, if nothing else. It's the very, very end of this summary document.
I sort of brought that issue up, going back to a issue back in the great state of Texas, where the veterinary college was going to site its swine reproduction facilities on the edge of town. And I don't know the distances involved, but they were not far out. And actually, one of the faculty of the veterinary colleges sued them to stop the building of it because the odors coming off of pig farms are not pleasant. And the USDA has even given millions of dollars of grants to try and come up with ways of reducing the odor off of a pig farm. And so that may be an extreme, but there could be certainly situations where 3 or 4 houses in a place, somebody bought the place, 5 years later, suddenly there comes a use of an adjacent property that just makes it, I won't say unlivable, but very unpleasant. So does the homeowner who has been there before the change occurred have any recourse under this system?
Farmers ask that same question all the time when a neighbor, when somebody builds a house, and then the expectations can sometimes be very different than what they were before that person moved in.
Oh yeah, no, the flip is the easy one, because even the document up front says, hey, this is a farm community and this is what's here. That's fine. I mean, I have no problem. If you want to build a house next to your dairy farm, that's you've seen that. You've got open eyes. But if you decide to buy a house and, like I say, 5 years later, that cornfield suddenly becomes a slaughterhouse, let's say, that's a different game, because the rules have changed, and there should be some way of addressing it. I'm not sure what it is, but it's certainly not fair to the person because who purchased this under the assumption this is what's happening, and then to be faced with a situation very different in subsequent years. The issue of, oh, I built a house and it's next to a dairy farm, but I don't like that. That's a problem. That's ridiculous. They moved in with the understanding this is a rural area, live with it. But moving in with the understanding that in 5 years there's going to be a pig farm there, that's a little different.
So do you suggest that there are particular agricultural activities that would be limited?
That's a tough one, because you're back to trying to put specificity on something you don't anticipate. But I used that one. I thought was probably a pretty extreme on terms of odor, with driving people nuts. But I don't know that this document is the place to do it. But there should be some way of addressing that kind of, whether it's going through the site plan. If somebody wants to build a pig farm next to the thing, the site plan can come in and say, hey, that's totally off base with what the current whatever flavor of the community is, and ban it. If it can be dealt with at that level, that's fine. But it's not an impossible situation to occur.
No, it's a great question.
So in New York State, those type of confined animal feeding operations, I'm assuming that's what you might be referencing, are regulated by New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They typically have things like a comprehensive nutrient management plan and the like. So they're managed wholly by the DEC.
So the CAFOs, so you're saying that the town really has little impact on that process.
Especially in an ag district, it would be kind of silly not to allow ag operations to exist in the ag district.
In most cases, absolutely correct, but there can be some, it could be a bad outcome here.
Right.
Maybe we're kind of talking buyer beware here, and for folks to understand what could happen in the future. But
It's a tough one.
Yeah, but in the end, it's not going to, even if they know that it's a potential, until it happens to them, and at that point, they're not going to care what they were told previously. If they don't like it, they're not going to like it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And how you deal with that, I don't know.
And I don't think the DEC's CAFO plans have anything to do with odor. I've never seen anything to do with odor in those. So
Right.
the unpleasantness you're talking about, Ed, is not addressed by DEC.
I wouldn't think so.
Right.
Because, yeah, you could put in the most environmentally strict rules, regulations with regard to waste management, nutrient management, everything else. But what goes up in the air is, I'm sure they had no thought to try and deal with. Well, that's a different can of worms, I suppose. One thing I don't want to drop off is we've got in here places where there is the provisions for daycare centers and group centers for children. What we don't have in this document is a provision for adult group housing, such as the Racker Centers does for developmentally disabled individuals and whatever. There is group housing all over the county, basically, of 5, 10, 15 adults who are in a group home situation. And this document does not address that. They deal with children, but not adult group housing units. And I think that would be a serious oversight if that wasn't included.
Well, maybe that's not an appropriate thing to have in an ag area, whereas daycare, farm workers need daycare.
And I know we've seen provisions for, like senior housing and things like that Ed's talking about. Were they more in the rural ag part and not strictly the ag? I can't remember. I know I've seen them referenced before, but they're obviously not in here now.
Yeah, the idea is to obviously, minimize residential development within the agriculture zoning district. And so there are some uses that would be required. So those definitions that are included are pulled straight from the state's definition of group family daycare. Those are the social services definition. So, but we'd like to make sure that larger scale residential development is sited on planned or existing at least water infrastructure.
Well, these units aren't that big. I mean, we're only talking about 5 or 6 adults in a, they typically just buy a house and subdivide it. No,
Yeah,
it's not like
exactly.
it's not like
Those
building.
would fall. Yeah, that would fall under the group family home, or it's called daycare there, but it could be, it could be any ages for a facility like that. It's just like basically a single family or single unit residential structure. Yeah.
Well, the only thing that threw me off was it's generally 7 to 14 children. So maybe they need to tweak that language in there.
I think, John Fleming, you were proposing that we just strike that phrase.
Yeah, it's another arbitrary number. If there's already regulations through the county for how you operate it, why would we have to throw in any numbers? That should be up to them to take care of how many people, you know, how many children are going to be there, depending on how many caretakers there are, I guess. Because even 7 to 14, it's a pretty good range as it is. So I would think another agency would already have that taken care of.
Well, should we move on from this, Tom?
Yeah, so maybe we should, we can do this, somebody can do this later, but we'll add some in the beginning, something about a little more more rationale for some of these could be useful in the code. But other than that, I think we should, CJ wants this tomorrow, right, CJ?
Yeah, so does
So-
someone have time to just add that phrase in there and then send it back to CJ?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Awesome.
So also, please keep in mind that if the comments that you're asking are not necessarily addressed, there's always the opportunity to, review the document at the town board level as well. So, this is not your last chance, to comment. So it's helpful to have the comments now so they can be distributed to the code revision committee, but please don't think this is the last opportunity.
So are we okay with that then?
Yes, thanks, Tom.
Sounds good.
Well, thanks everybody who contributed. Big group effort.
Were you going to say something, John? Something?
No, I was just fiddling around with something that was in the way there.
Okay, well, then shall we move on to our next big topic? Let's see, proposing secret type 1 action, Dandy Mini Mart. Okay, we already have sent in our comments. So, and there was a planning board meeting on Monday about Dandy Mini Mart. It was very well attended. The room was full. Everybody but one person was against what's proposed. There was a lot of citing of it doesn't go with the comprehensive plan, and it's unsafe. And there's concern about light, noise, and fumes in general. So and Dandy Mart, 2 people from Dandy Mart who were sort of the lead people on it were there, and they heard all of this. And we'll see what happens after that. But this is going to go on for at least 2 more planning board meetings, at the very least, I would say. So there'll be another, I assume there's going to be an open public meeting at the next planning board meeting at the end of next month about this again. And then again, probably in August. But yes, it's obvious that this is a big issue in the town. So it was good to see everybody coming out, and the planning board was listening, and Dandy Mart was listening too. Do we want to say anything more about that? Okay, then let's move on to John and Katie and what we're up to with the open space index. John, do you want to say something about it?
Sure. We don't have a lot of show and tell, but we've got just a couple slides. If we can, I can't see where we can share a screen. If we can't, it's not a big deal. We can just kind of have a conversation. We don't always have to use our PowerPoint as a crutch, but we always like to use it as a focus.
I think you should be able to share your screen.
At the bottom should be a
There
green.
we go. Yep. Thank you.
John, you got it? Okay.
Did everyone see that?
Yep.
Yep.
I'm used to, it's funny, I'm out of practice with Zoom and now I'm more familiar with Teams. So it's like the gears in my brain are not meshing with different technology tonight. Anyway, good to see everyone. You want to thank John and Tom for taking time to give Katie and I a pretty extensive tour, which we'll talk about in a little bit, of Lansing. It really was a nice way to spend the day. I mean, it was spectacular weather and
Yeah.
Extremely gracious and knowledgeable tour guides. And these are some of the sites we saw. I mean, obviously your residents, you know what your town looks like and how beautiful it is in every direction. I mean, when we first got the map of the potential tour spots that we're going to be saying, I'm always a glass half full kind of person. I'm pretty optimistic. I was like, are there this many good looking spots in Lansing? I mean, it's like, there was like 60 of them. I'm like, that seems like they're just being a little, overly optimistic. And then as we're driving around, like every time the car made a left, right turn, I was like, yeah, there's another beautiful view. So yeah, that definitely was a great tour, and it was accurate in how many spots there are in Lansing that are just beautiful. I was saying to Katie in the back seat, we were kind of mumbling. One quarter might almost feel like Adirondacks, and one quarter feels like Finger Lakes. And then there's rural America, which is beautiful out there too in terms of the farming operations and things of that nature. So you know what I'm saying. You guys are blessed with a beautiful area everywhere in the town. We didn't see one spot in the town. It was like, that place isn't so nice in that corner or that corner. It really doesn't work out that way in Lansing. So we appreciate the time, for the tour. Thank you.
We didn't show you all the nice spots. There's more.
Normally I'd say you're just, bragging, but no, I believe you. I firmly believe it. And Katie, I don't know if you have anything to add to any of your impressions of our time down there, because you were able to do the Bell Station tour. I was not able to do that piece.
Yeah, I was going to say it was great to be able to tour that site, and what an amazing asset for the town, and a huge victory for you guys. So kudos to that.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this to both Carrie and Tom, but I think it was invaluable to us because we can look at Google Maps all day and look at Street View, but just to get the full sense of the character and it's obvious why this is so crucial. This plan is so crucial to you guys moving forward to make sure that these views and this open space gets preserved and considered in perpetuity. So.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So thank you again, for your time.
By the way, don't use the word preserved around the planning board.
I have that in my notes. Conserve,
like
not
conserve.
All right, I was going to say, what's the word preference, word choice?
Conserved. Yes.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Duly noted.
If I misuse, if I do say the P word, make sure you correct me every time.
Around us, I don't think it's a problem.
That's all right. Well, might as well get in practice of using the more appropriate terminology for Lansing. I'm fine with that.
No, I make that mistake every time, and Tom has to pull me up short.
Ixnay on the P word. Okay. Understood. No, that's good to know. It really is. So anything like that, any local vernacular, any landmines that you guys can help us avoid, we appreciate that. And if we say it in a public setting in front of the planning board, you can say, we've been telling Steinmetz and Darcy that for months. So you can just blame it on us for being thick. So the other housekeeping item we want to talk about tonight again, and because the next, after this meeting, we start to really dive in and, we'll get into the mapping and really start to do the fun planning pieces. Not that this coordination isn't fun, it's necessary, but we're really going to start to dive in after this. So we want to get this communication and outreach strategy to you for your review and comment. And right now, the way we're thinking about this and kind of the who's who and kind of the nuts and bolts of this, obviously the key players as we see them. And again, this is a question, not necessarily a statement. So if we're missing other things, this is what you can let us know. The key players, ourselves, you, the stakeholders that we'll talk about in a little bit, and then the general public. And we're going to go in some detailed conversation about the stakeholders in a second with the list that you gave us. So we see that as the key players. Some communities add decision makers, as a standalone bullet, elected officials, et cetera, because obviously they're a key player. To us, it's kind of inferred, but we're happy to add those if you think that makes sense, just to kind of dot our I's and cross our T's a little bit differently. And any other key players that we should reference in this document?
I think it's good to include town officials.
We can do that, and we can even reference staff as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, they play a key role on several fronts. Let's make notes.
Or another way of saying that would be public servants, because then you can capture some of the other.
The county
Egos.
staff, maybe, yeah. So yeah, this document is basically outlining who's going to be involved, what the purpose of the involvement is, and how exactly that's going to be accomplished through these various components.
And then, so for our outreach process and our objectives, obviously we want to distill key issues. We want to identify opportunities for conservation. See, I'm getting there. Conservation opportunities, whether it's, through public-private partnerships, whether it's, through potential review processes. I mean, there's I won't say a broad, but there's a decent range of tools available to capitalize on opportunities once we identify them in the context of what we're trying to preserve or conserve, and then which tool makes the most sense to apply. We want to obviously get input on our draft deliverables from the CAC, then also outreach to the public later on in the process. And we've changed that process timeline. You'll see that in a little bit. We want to make sure that our outreach strategy gets the feedback that we need. And I say we, the collective we, not just a consultant team, but the CAC as well, on the items we produce throughout the process. And then ultimately, and hopefully best case scenario, we can instill some community ownership beyond the group that's on this call in support of the plan and its recommendations over the long haul, over the next 10 to 20 years. Any other objectives that come to mind that you want to make sure we highlight that we may have overlooked in terms of when you think of our community outreach strategy? What are some of the other goals or objectives we should be shooting for and striving for?
Maybe world peace, but these look good.
That's a
small
tall
ask.
order these days, Todd. That's a good one though. That would be nice. All right, and like I said, you're going to have a chance to look at the actual document and comment on it. So this is not like a speak now, forever hold your peace moment. Some of the details on the key outreach components, obviously this group, we identified 2 public meetings, one earlier on in the process and one later on in the process. When we have, early on in the process, we want to do more listening and engage in the community and kind of glean ideas from those in attendance. And then later on in the process, kind of do a show and tell in terms of, what we've learned or what we think we know as a group, and where we think the community would most benefit from its time and energy being spent. For pop-up events, we had a lot of discussion about that last time, a lot of good conversation, and I want to spend a little bit of time on that tonight as well, in terms of, Katie and I envisioned scoping out going to one pop-up event. I think that's really good use of our time. Potentially, Katie, I keep saying, well, it's so pretty, we could go down there again for one of the music things. But we were intrigued with the September event, the carnival, or the, we thought that one would be a really good one for two reasons. One, just the way you described the setup to us, it seemed like we would benefit from the physical arrangement of it, the people in attendance, and we could also use that as a way to promote a first public meeting. If we're going to do that in September, we would capitalize on the opportunity and say, well, then it makes sense to maybe do our first public meeting a couple of weeks after that. So we could also use that to, if you look at our objectives, to increase awareness, get some input on the process, and potentially get some community ownership earlier on in the process, so we can, really get the word out at a pop-up event in, I'm not sure when that is, mid-September. I can't remember when you guys told us it is. And then we could do a public meeting a couple weeks later. And I think that 1-2 punch could be really effective for turnout. How does that sound to everyone in terms of if Katie and I, our time being spent going to the event in September and then followed by a community meeting in either late September or early October?
Hey, John, I'm a little concerned about putting all eggs in one basket. Is there any chance that you can schedule more than one?
Well, a couple of things, a few things, and I can't see who said that. That's a good comment.
Eric.
Yeah, so a few things. One, as we talked about last time, we would encourage and we can help you. I mean, when we do projects like this, we see ourselves and you as a team. So we can give you boards, give you all the things that we would have in September and provide those to you as well for other events. So we don't have to necessarily hear and see everything firsthand. We enjoy that. We like what we do. We like that kind of thing. But between the online survey and the survey that we're going to do, the online and potentially print survey that we're going to do, the public meeting, the pop-up event that we're at, that's going to give us, plus all our conversations with you, that's going to give us multiple touches with the community in terms of gleaning the first round of information that we need. For us to go to 3, 4, or 5 of these things, my experience is it's laws of diminishing returns. You start to hear the same thing here, and again and again and again. So I would encourage you guys to say, look at, well, we could attend this community event or that. I think that makes a lot of sense from our point of view and our experience.
Are you going to be, just a follow-up question quickly?
Sure.
Are you, as you sit at the pop-up event, are you going to have a standardized survey instruments that you're using, or is it going to be more ad hoc? And if it is a survey instrument, would you be able to give us some input on how it might be possibly modified depending on what our audience is?
Oh, good question. Yeah. Well, two different answers to that question. So in terms of the survey instrument that we're going to do community-wide, that will be something that will be a little more robust and in-depth. Our pop-up events it will complement the more in-depth survey, but tend to be we gear that to be more conversational. So it's a little bit lighter, I guess, and not so much as a deep dive. We don't want people feeling that they have to stop by the pop-up event and take 15 minutes to fill out a survey. We more want to have a conversation with them, and then if they're so inclined, and hopefully they are, we could then direct them to that survey and say, hey, if you want to give us some more opinion, please, here's the QR code, or here's the address, or if we as a group decide to do paper surveys, here's a paper survey, you can fill out now or take it with you. So I think our pop-up events tend to be geared toward be more conversational with some boards and some idea generation. But then we can use that event and use those opportunities to steer them to a more in-depth survey. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Hopefully we do the best of both worlds. Hopefully we get that passerby that just is like, hey, I just want to know what this is about. And they will be lucky to get 30 seconds to a minute of their time. And then if we get the people that say, hey, this is of interest to me, I'm going to sit here and complete the survey and talk to you for Hours, we've had that. We've had people stop at our booth early on and never leave. And that's always fun. And then we have the people that are, 5 minutes, they got it, they like it, or they don't, they've given us their piece, and then they're going to go on to, why they came that evening, whatever the case may be, to fun and frolic with friends and family. Then we're going to talk about local stakeholder interviews. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And then the online tools, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but it was okay in response to Karen's good question, is the survey. I mean, I think that's going to be really important for all the objectives we talked about. It's going to be good for identifying key issues and opportunities, but also creating awareness of what we're doing. And kind of a side benefit of that thing is, kind of why it's important too. I think the surveys tend to accomplish quite a bit with it as a single tool.
So, John, before you move on, could you go back to your, local stakeholder interviews? So that's like you go to some major landowner to their house or whatever, or over the phone and speak to them. How does that work?
It varies. Katie, I can't recall. I think you and I talked yesterday. The Google Doc had 37?
Yeah, something around that last time I looked at it.
Yeah, 35 plus names on it. So we've done it both ways. Where we have that many people, it might make sense to put some of them into groups, and then we'll defer to you if you say, that property owner or that property owner, you might want to talk to them one-on-one. We respect that. We understand sometimes that makes the most sense. I think initially for this first round is, I think we could do them in groups. I don't mind talking to people one-on-one. I mean, I enjoy the conversations. I always get a lot out of it. And Tom, we actually do it, whatever's good for those folks. Some people, especially this time of year, I know the farming community is insanely busy. So can we always meet with them on site? No. Sometimes they, I've literally had interviews where the guys, it's always a gentleman in this case, but the guy's on a tractor and he said, I can give you 10 minutes. So, we'll take 10 minutes over the phone if that's what it takes to have the conversation. So we're supremely flexible in these stakeholder interviews. Given the number of people you identified, we can't do 36 conversations separately. That's just too much time, too much inefficiency. So we would look to having conversations with you. Are there similar walks of life that we could combine, and personalities? We respect that too. We understand that if Joe and Jane across town don't get along, we probably don't want to put them in the same focus group. So we'll kind of feel our way on this. I think given the number of names you gave us, I think we'll group some of them together if we can. And then, some of the other people, if it makes sense to talk to them one-on-one or something like that, we're happy to do that too. So we'll be flexible. I think it becomes a little more important later on in the process when we start to identify, some high priority areas. Then it might make some more sense to have those one-on-one conversations. If you've got a major landowner we haven't done any analysis yet, so I'm completely just giving you a general idea of, this landowner has got multiple properties that we've identified for conservation with different potential ways to do that. We should probably talk to this person one-on-one and give that person the heads up that his or her property is in the plan in a significant way, or in the index in a significant way. So later on, I think it's pays to be a little more delicate. Right now, I think it's more just information gathering. We don't have any recommendations. So there's really, I'm not naive. I won't say there's nothing controversial about what we're doing. I'm not that naive, but we haven't really done anything to react to. So I think it's okay to group people together unless you all tell us differently.
Okay, thanks, John.
So what's your thoughts? Do you think that, we won't go through that list one by one tonight, but the idea of having some focus groups And then we would ask that, one or two people from the CAC come in or not. Sometimes CAC said we'd rather have you guys just do it solo. Sometimes it's good to have you guys listen in and help facilitate. We can deal with that once we get them scheduled. But is everyone receptive to the idea of us merging some of those names into focus groups?
Sure.
And in doing so, pare down the number of individuals, right? Is what you're thinking?
Correct.
Yeah,
You got it.
I think that's fine. And so what would be your timeline for that?
It's a good question. In July, probably. I know it's a tough month, but you never know with focus group. By the time we reach out and contact, could we do them in August? Yes. Or sorry, can we do them in July? Yes, but realistically, it'll probably end of July, early August. Having said that, if we get some people that can, if we send emails out, we get contact information, and somebody says, "Hey, I can meet mid-July," we'll do it. We're not going to slow down the process. I just know how long it takes to kind of herd the cats in this process, and sometimes it can take a couple of weeks just to get a hold of everyone, and then you try to give people 1 to 2 weeks lead time so they can put in their calendar appropriately. So I would be shooting for end of July, early August to do this if possible. Given it's summer and people travel a lot in the summer, that's going to be a challenge sometimes too. But I'd like to have them done in the next 4 to 5 weeks.
And John, I think that aligns with what we have on the schedule right now. We're targeting August with a little leeway on both sides of the month.
Oh, great. Yeah. And August is always tough. I mean, people, that tends to be a travel month, but we'll give it the college try.
Do you want to work with just a little subset of our CAC to maybe get assistance in thinking that through, or you want to go at it, just Katie and you, John, or
no, we'd welcome, because we don't know the names. So when we start to group people, we may not know exactly what prompted their inclusion in that list and why they might, us playing the match game is risky without your input. So I think that makes a lot of sense if we can rely on a subset of you to kind of guide us. And then we'll communicate via email really effectively and saying, so here's the preliminary list of groupings and people and lists, and how's everyone feel about that? So,
okay,
all of you will have input, but yes, we would welcome, a couple of you helping us out with the grouping process.
So John, just kind of an alternative suggestion along those same lines is maybe you can send Tom and Carrie your list of 35, and they can highlight, or maybe consult with the rest of the CAC, highlight any people that might be problems before you group them and contact them. And then that saves a step of, we got these people that can meet on this day. And then we look at it and say, oh yeah, John Fleming's group does not get along with his. But I was just thinking we could identify potential problems ahead of time. Maybe that might be easier than for you going forward with the grouping.
No, I think that's a great idea. And the 35 plus names, those are the ones that you guys gave us. We might pare that down a little. We may not. I mean, that's a lot of names. We're happy to talk to all of them if we can do it efficiently, but it may not be necessary to talk to all 35 now. It might be more important to talk to them at the end of the process when we actually have recommendations or ideas that may impact their property. So we won't cross anyone off the list without talking to the couple people we'll be working with. If we cross anyone off, we wouldn't do it without your guys' blessing.
Yeah, that means Todd, all those names are now available on the Google Doc that Katie set up, so you can see them all.
You can put that in the chat here too.
Yeah, I guess I would just amend your suggestion, Todd, that many of us have different kinds of contacts. I think Karen probably has a really good idea of who would clash with whom, and she's a liaison to Bergman anyway. So I would include Karen in that little circle.
That's great. So that's already been, maybe that will have been stemmed before you even make the group. So that's great. So Forget my
Yeah.
suggestion.
And as soon as Karen gets off the call, then we'll all vote on that and make sure.
Ah.
Talk about her behind her back. Yeah,
No, this is the interesting part. You're keeping my attention this way. So we should just set up a time, John, to go through that. And just so you know, I'm gonna be completely offline starting this weekend until Tuesday night. So just know that's kind of a blackout time for me.
Well, clearly you're taking Tuesday off because it's my birthday, so I respect that. So,
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to come back from off grid in the Adirondacks to give 5 minutes in a webinar. It's just.
oh yeah, it's a burden.
I'd much rather come to your birthday party.
No, that's good to know. No offense. I don't know how much we'll be thinking about Lansing over the holiday weekend. So that's not a problem at all. So in terms of this group, who else? Karen, and then what other 1 or 2 names do you recommend that we work with on the committee? I want the committee to be comfortable with who we're doing this process with amongst your group.
I think Karen's great. John Fleming might know if there's any kind of like weirdness out there, but
Oh, there is.
okay. So that's why I brought John Fleming up.
And Tom Fleming.
And when you get, John, when you get to one-on-ones, obviously it's someone from the CAC making an initial contact to kind of get these people prepared that you're going to be contacting them, obviously.
Yeah, most of the time that's the way it works. That's the way it works. But to be honest with you, we're pretty friendly and comfortable reaching out to pretty much all walks of life. So sometimes, with your permission, we just cold call or cold email folks with introduce who we are. And then, like I said, sometimes I have a conversation right that second. Sometimes they say, well, let me call Jen Fleming and make sure this is legit, so we've had success with all of it. But yeah, I think the best thing to do is have you guys make the first outreach and then go from there.
All right.
And of course, I can't wait to look at the list now and see why Carrie has accorded me with these superpowers. So
Yeah, I just looked at it and yeah, Karen and John, you guys will want to weigh in. There's definitely some anyway.
Some characters.
Some friction, yeah.
Okay.
I would also love it if anybody else on the committee wants to send private pieces of advice around in case, Todd, you know of something that, for example, I don't. That would be great.
And Tom, you're going to know a lot too.
Yeah, I'd be happy to participate in this.
So I've got Karen, John, and Tom.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Our guides to keep us out of trouble as best we can. All right, and then obviously like the online, the survey, that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that in the strategy as well. That's going to be key, especially early on in the process. So we'll talk about that in our engagement strategy as well.
That's something that I would be willing to take a look at when it's drafted. I know you've done these many, many times before. But if you do want some people from the CAC to take a peek at it, I'm happy to take a stab at it from this side.
No, we'll take you up on that, because one of the things that's kind of fun about this project is how much work you guys have already done. So as you know, Katie and I do a lot of surveys. So the question will be, do we do a more open-ended map-based survey, which I think is kind of the default position. That's how we normally go. Or do we weave, I guess is the best word I can choose, the weave some of the ideas that you guys have already kind of gleaned out in the NRI and the SRI and some of these things, and do we weave those into the survey? To be determined. we'll see how that pans out. So we would welcome your input on the survey instrument drafting. And then I know we talked about this before, and we're gonna talk about it, each meeting until we feel like we've done it well, is again, some of the underserved populations in Lansing, how do we make sure we reach out to them? What successful or unsuccessful things have you done in the past? I know we talked about it previously. And I know we really appreciated that story of the park that we went to that, the locals didn't really appreciate the design proposal, et cetera. I'm not going to rehash it. But I thought that was an interesting wrinkle that we don't want to repeat something like that. To me, that was a geographic, I don't want to say oversight because I wasn't involved. I'm just using that adjective based on what you told me as a group. So, is there certain geographic areas of the town that are hard to get people to engage, or is it types of people in the town that are hard to engage? We want to make sure we're successful in reaching out to the broadest geography and the broadest, socioeconomic cross-section we can.
Our least favorite comment is we never heard about this at the end of the plan. So that we're trying to be proactive in that. And like John said, whether it's geographic or socioeconomic or whatever category of resident, we want to make sure that we're accommodating everyone.
Yeah, so we have sometimes we have challenges reaching renters. That's sometimes the landlord doesn't always goes to an address, or the landlord picks it up, or sometimes that tends to be a challenge. I don't know if that's a challenge in Lansing or not.
Well, one question is, what do we do about the village of Lansing?
I have an answer, but I'm not going to share it with you. And so I'm going to have you guys answer that first.
Because
what do you guys think?
Technically it's part of the town, but they have their own government.
What's the group's thought on that?
Well, my first thought is that one of the iconic views in Lansing is on Trip Hammer Road, which is in the village.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need to talk to them.
I agree.
I know the mayor pretty well, and I'll ask them if they want to participate at some level.
If you open that, you're opening up a huge rental space, which is going to be mostly Cornell related students, etc., who will probably have a not a great interest in what's going to go on in Lansing in 2 years, 3 years, because they're not going to be here. So the question would be, how much effort would, if you did that, do you put into that kind of a sort of a transient population? That's a tough one.
Well, at the very least, though, I think we should contact the village authorities, the mayor and the people on the board, or the trustees, whatever they call themselves. I think they're trustees. We should at least let them know what we're doing, and if they want to, what they wanted, would they like to contribute in some
I
way?
think you're exactly right, Tom, because the worst would be to have them come back and be angry that we did something behind their back without including them.
Right.
And plus we have a star presenter in our midst who has done this, a number of times, whose box is still lit up on my screen here. Todd.
What am I being volunteered for here, Carrie?
I just said you were a star presenter if we want to reach out to the village.
Oh, okay. Tom said he knew the mayor, so I feel like that's a personal connection that might be more valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to reach out to village folks. I mean, I appreciate the comment about that's the transient, especially the student population being gone in 2 to 3 years. But I think we'd be remiss not to reach out to them through all the channels that we just discussed. And I think we haven't put pen to paper on the survey yet, but typically we would request, not require, but request people to let us know where they live and as part of the survey, if they're so inclined to let us know. So we could, without too much difficulty, because we usually have success with people sharing that information, we can compare and contrast village opinions versus town opinions, combine, separate. We can have fun with the data and kind of see what the opinions and values are and see if there's any differences between village and town when it comes to this topic. So we can kind of get the best of both worlds, reach out to them, and then also see how their opinions may align with non-village town residents, if that makes sense.
So John, I have some background on that. We did a survey when we were doing the comp plan, asking all kinds of questions. And when we tallied the results, we did it including the village and not including the village, and the pie charts looked very similar.
Okay.
So
that's interesting to hear. They don't always look similar, so that's kind of telling. Yeah, it's not good or bad. It's just interesting. Yeah. No, that's good to know.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was not a lot of difference in almost all the cases. The percentages were similar.
And we'll dig into some of the, now that makes me have three other questions about the comp plan survey, but we'll dig into that as we're drafting this one to see if we can be smarter. Not saying that wasn't smart, but since you've done it, we can build on it and hope we'll be smarter, or since you've done it.
We did bring up this very topic of underserved populations and reaching them at a meeting prior to you folks coming officially on board. And we had a short list of ideas, and I think it involved going to some of the apartment complexes in the town of Lansing, not even including at that point the village, although I think it's a good idea. And yet I think there are those who are living out in the more rural parts of Lansing who could be considered underserved also. So I'll try to dig those suggestions out.
Yeah, please do, Carrie. Thank you. So we've already talked about this. We are so efficient. And then
You jumped the gun on all these slides, John.
I know I did. I apologize, Katie.
This is awesome.
Katie, do you want to go through the changes that we made to this?
Yeah, so just few minimal changes. There was some feedback at our last meeting about pushing the second public meeting back into the draft phase of the plan, which I think makes a lot of sense. So that could get pushed back. I mean, basically when we have a draft plan, I think it's appropriate for us to set up that public meeting. And then the other minor edit is we added the pop-up events, assuming that that's going to happen in the summer months here as we get going in the initial phases of this project. And that's not to say that there might be other opportunities later on in the plan to promote the public event or that type of thing too, but that was kind of our initial thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, the way this schedule is kind of unfolding, it almost seems natural to potentially do a pop-up event when we have things to share next summer. It seems like that would be another natural show and tell kind of opportunity, singular opportunities, plural. Lots of good stuff, lots of good opportunities for this one.
Yeah, I like that. Just as long as it's not so late that we can't incorporate any feedback you get from the pop-up.
Sure, no, good point.
Mm-hmm.
We'll send this to you, so Just want to show it to you. Let you know that we modified it. So our homework, like I said, now once the fun begins, we'll draft that public engagement, public outreach strategy for this entire group's review and comment. And we're going to start thinking about the survey. We're definitely going to have a map-based component. We envision this being initially a map-centric kind of thing. But we've got a lot of ideas on this one. So we'll see how the survey pans out. Should be fun. And then we'll confirm, the pop-up attendance, logistics, timing, materials that may be needed. So give some thought to each of you individually if you would be willing to, or see merit in having you do a pop-up event during the summer. Katie and I could always divide and conquer too. I could do one, she could do one in the fall, or vice versa. We're flexible. We're not trying to be rigid. We're just trying to make, keep you engaged, utilize your local knowledge, and as best we can, and then use these pop-up events because they really are fun. We really enjoy them. I know people's travel plans are tricky, but the music events are happening. Have they started yet? I haven't looked at the calendar.
I don't think so. Usually there's like announcements at the corner of 34B and what is that? Trip Hammer, but I haven't seen that yet. Anybody else know? Is the music in the park started?
I think it's on the town calendar. If you go to the town's website, it'll say upcoming events.
Okay.
I think up on Thursdays or something.
Usually Thursdays, and they're fun.
Yeah, Katie and I love live music, so that's one thing we're like, that would be really neat. My only concern was someone had said last time we talked about this that we've been to a lot of music events. If there's really not a focused, if we're the only booth, or if it's going to be kind of a random distribution of people, that we might not be able to attract them over to us. Obviously, if they're trying to see live music. So we think we're intrigued with it, but we just want to make sure it's not a waste of time. If you think everyone's going to be, you'd be the only booth there and people are going to be walking right past you and they're going to be more worried about the music or more interested in the music. I don't see that being the case, but I've never gone to one of your events.
Well, they'll be toasted, but you get to see live music still.
And maybe they'll be a little more freer with their opinions.
Yeah, I was at a pop-up event this past weekend at the Jazz Fest in Rochester, and similar scenario, I'd say.
Oh, that's funny. So that's all we had for you this evening. I know you guys have had a full agenda. It's almost 2 hours in. I don't know if you have anything else to talk about tonight, but we'll be sending you materials to chew on, and we'll coordinate with Karen, John, and Tom about the focus group and the Google Docs list. Carrie, we're not going to be starting. The survey is item number 3 on our list. We've got to get this community outreach strategy done, and then get these focus groups and these interviews organized, and then we'll hit the survey. So we don't necessarily have to work sequentially, but the survey is the bottom of the 3 that we want to tackle in the near future. So if you don't hear from us about the survey in the next week, don't panic.
Oh, I'm going to start panicking for sure.
Don't panic. Don't push the panic button.
Not a problem. I have like a whole lot of family visiting, so you might need to like rattle my cage a little, texting, call me. I do think it would be great if you could hang on, John and Katie, so that you're part of this discussion about the in-person meetings. So, Tom, I think we were going to talk about that at the end of this meeting.
Right. And we're at the end, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
The last time we brought up this topic, Karen, you said you were not ready to meet in person. I have some constraints in caring for my dad here in Vermont. And I know that Katie, you and John are in the Rochester area. So I'm just curious to know, it sounds like we are subject to this town resolution, right?
Yeah, and like Karen, I'm not that excited about this. And to just be completely honest with you guys, I'm not changing my travel and vacation plans around CAC meetings. I mean, I don't. Maybe all the rest of you are going to do that, but if I'm going to go someplace and the opening is there, I could participate. But if this rule says I can't, that's a problem. The thing I didn't like about it is there was no way to ask for a waiver. You know, oh, what this thing came up and in June, and Todd already planned to be away in August, but there's no way to have to deal with that, or people that don't feel safe because there's still a pandemic. There was no way to like have a waiver on this thing that I could see when I read through it. And I think that was a huge problem. I understand, if I understand the intent was that there are people that feel they can't participate because there's no physical place to go and be part of the process. It wasn't clear why you needed a quorum of the committee to be, or the group to be there in person. So this is just a terrible, I think this is a terrible rule.
I am completely with you, Todd. I will stand together with you on that in a big way.
Is it just a local rule from the town? It's not something statewide or anything.
I think it's a statewide open meetings law.
But the way it was written, it implied that advisory committees were not subject to the open meetings law. And the CAC is an advisory committee. It's not an official body. And so
CJ, can you weigh in?
Yeah, well, it depends on whether you go by the Attorney General's advisory opinions or whether you go by the Council of Open Government's opinions. So it's kind of an outstanding question. And I'm happy to ask town council to give a definitive answer, but I'm going to guess that, attorney for the town will probably come down on the side of, when in doubt, or if there's a state opinion to the contrary, then the committee would need to meet in person.
So, we kind of went on record last time saying that we had discussed it and we had decided to keep meeting by way of Zoom. What are the consequences if we continue to want to meet by Zoom? And is there a way for someone to come to town hall if they don't have connectivity from another location and Zoom into this meeting?
As it's stood thus far, either the boards, and largely I think the video conferencing policy was intended for boards that have the ability to, make binding recommendations and, are making, decisions, versus an advisory committee. But the short of the long is, whatever the attorney for the town recommends, either to continue to meet via Zoom, and you obviously will have an unabridged video recording as part of the record. So to me, that seems adequate, but for you to continue meeting via Zoom. But again, I'm going to defer to him because there are specific advisory opinions from, again, the state AG as well as the Committee on Open Government, although I guess in the absence of Robert Freeman, who knows, I guess, how these things would stand up in a court. But I'll do my best to get you an answer here within the next couple of weeks, because your next meeting, I think, is Thursday, August 4th.
Yeah, thanks, CJ. I think there really are there are so many factors. One, that we're all busy and professional and often have to travel, and the Zoom does give us the potential to come in from afar. And, I think Carrie's situation is particularly concerning because we really need her in these meetings. And if she's 6 hours away, that's going to be a problem. So I really hope that we can sort this out.
Well, I mean, what are they gonna do if we keep doing Zoom meetings? They're gonna fire us?
I'm sure some people would like to.
Well, they can take all the money they're giving me and keep it.
All right.
Yeah,
So we'll get an official answer and then we'll have to decide what we do. It is quite nice being able to Zoom for an hour or so with the Bergman folks, but
yeah.
we'll keep on keeping on, and we'll hear back from CJ at least about the legality.
And this might be a situation where it might be easier to ask for forgiveness than get permission.
Yeah. You saying that on YouTube, Todd?
We can see you too.
Busted.
It's pretty, yeah, let's, we edit this a little bit.
Oh,
Okay,
we're
well,
Bye.
gonna roll that possibility out now.
yeah, well, thanks, Karen. Hey, I want to thank Karen for staying on, by the way. I know you had to
Yeah.
leave
Yeah,
an hour
yes,
ago,
thank
but
you.
thank you.
Thanks.
you.
I am gonna
Thanks
run
to
now.
everybody.
We'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sticking around.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, I guess that's that. And I want to thank John and Katie for sticking around for the boring parts of our meeting that weren't directly related to you and giving and providing some interesting input. Thank you.
Yeah,
That said, are not these,
Go ahead,
these
Katie.
are not the boring parts for us. This is our bread and butter.
I was gonna say, what parts were boring?
Well, usually we fight like cats and dogs, but you guys were here, so we were on our best behavior.
So we're the mediating.
You were the
person.
mediators, yeah.
Happy to serve that role.
Appreciate your input. And thanks, everybody. Thanks for all your comments. And Tom, thanks for moving it forward.
sure. Thanks, everybody. That was
Hey,
great.
Tom, I found that thing. I found that small engine thing too, by the way, on what I forget what the road is. But I found the one you were talking about. So thank you for that.
On Sheldon
Sheldon
Road.
Road. Yeah.
Yeah, he's only 5 weeks behind.
Yeah, he has like 10,000 machines in his yard. Yeah.
Yeah, he just quit working at Cornell. Because he's too busy. with
Okay.
his
Well,
small
thanks for the
engine
lead
repair.
anyway.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He does good work.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in August.
All right. Good night,
Yeah.
all.
Hopefully
Thanks,
by
everyone.
Zoom.
Everybody.
Hopefully
Okay.
by Zoom.
Take care.